Hi there, my name's Pete Liston, and welcome to another episode of the Veteran Business Community Podcast. Today, we are going across the seas stateside to speak with Dr. Roy Taylor, who is also a Lieutenant Colonel in the Army as well as a police chief. Now, a story of service, a story of combat. Roy won the Bronze Star with Valor for bravery, in combat. A very successful entrepreneur and a very passionate American. The first episode, we unpack his journey into the military and particularly focus on the truly amazing story about how he won the Bronze Star with Valor. And in the second episode, we talk about the business career and really unpack a lot of the differences between the support that the United States veterans get in terms of enterprise and entrepreneurship versus the Australian veterans. So stay tuned. Episode 1 of Roy Taylor. Hello, my name's Pete Liston, and welcome to this episode of the Veteran Business Community Podcast, where I've got Roy Taylor with me here today. G'day, Roy.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to be going stateside today, where it's good morning for me and good afternoon for you. But Roy, do you prefer Doctor, Chief, or Colonel? Which one? Or just Roy?
Doctor, I look at when I get on the stand in federal court, I'm Dr. Colonel Chief Roy Taylor, because those are the levels of not only importance, but the difficulty in earning it. So a doctorate is more difficult than becoming a colonel in the Army, and becoming a colonel in the Army is more difficult than becoming a chief of police. So that's my rationale for rank ordering them. So, but for us, just Roy and Pete's fine with me.
Fantastic, mate. It's always a pleasure to talk to people stateside. Australia and the United States, particularly militarily, have such a tight embedded history of at least over 100 years of, I think, whatever campaign you guys are on, we're pretty well there as well. So it's always a pleasure to speak to another brethren veteran from around the world. Now, Roy, just tell us, whereabouts in the world did you grow up?
I grew up in Amherst, Ohio, which is a small community right off of Lake Erie. And I was there for the first 17 years of my life.
And was it from there that in a moment of madness, you joined the military?
I wouldn't say it was madness. When I was early in high school, I was a Boy Scout, and I was wanting to be an Eagle Scout. And over the time, the pack master decided he wasn't getting enough contributional help from the parents, and he was tired of doing it all on his own. So he quit and folded up our troop. So that left me wanting to do something, that was engaging. And I found Civil Air Patrol. Have you ever heard of it?
Never heard of it.
Civil Air Patrol was started in 1941 as the auxiliary to the United States Air Force. And its main mission during World War II was to fly the coast of the United States looking for submarines. And after the war was over, it became a search and rescue organization for downed aircraft. And part of their program is they have a cadet program. So you start out as an airman basic, and like me, I worked my way all up to full bird colonel as a cadet commander. So I found Civil Air Patrol. I really liked it. That gave me a good insight into the Air Force and the military life. And so when I graduated high school, after only 3 years instead of a typical 4, and I just turned 17, so I decided I wanted to go in the Air Force, and I went in as an enlisted airman instead of knowing the difference between the officer corps and the enlisted corps, which I should have. But I decided to go in enlisted and then specialize in law enforcement.
So this career of service started early, like even the preparation of it began in high school. What was it like during? So just to confirm, your military career was with the Air Force?
Well, I started out in the Air Force and did my 4 years of active duty there, and then I came back home to start my police career. And after a 19-year break in service, I went through officer candidate school and joined the Army National Guard.
Interesting. A 19-year break. Let's come back to the police service, but National Guard, that's the same as our reserve force in Australia. What was it like? So just a quick story for me is I was a farmer before in my moment, I walked in recruiting at age 30, and I had my 31st birthday at our version of West Point, which is military college at Dundroon. So I was certainly on the other end of the spectrum relative to all of the other, 19 or 20-year-old lads and girls that were there. What was it like for you going into officer cadet school, being a little bit senior? What are we, like 35-ish or senior? 35?
I was 40.
40, mate.
40 years old. So everybody else is in their mid to late 20s, and I'm 40 years old. And I became class president. I was honor graduate. I remember we had what we called pre-OCS, when OCS was Officer Candidate School. But that was to kind of indoctrinate you, to show you a glimpse of what life is going to be like for the next year with yelling and screaming and physical
Yep.
fitness. And they said, all right, who's going to run the 2 miles in 12 minutes? And nobody raised their hand. Said, who's going to run the 2 miles in 13 minutes? I raised my hand. They said, Grandpa, you're going to run it in 13 minutes? And I said, absolutely. Because I
Come
was
watch
also,
me.
a chief of police. I was on a SWAT team. I was a physical fitness instructor for the police academy. So I, went in excellent physical condition, and, I was out running and outperforming the younger people. Eventually, I was in much better shape than all the other candidates. But as the training went on and they were younger and trained harder, then they started passing me and all the different aspects of it because of my age. But I gave them a run for their money at the beginning, and was certainly not the last person to cross the finish line throughout the
Yeah.
entire program. And like I said, I became honor graduate and was the class president. So I had a lot of extra responsibilities to, take care of, and the administration and regulation of the class.
Did you have, okay, I want to go back to finish up with your Air Force career and talk about your transition into civil policing. You've already like a military policeman in the Air Force, is that right?
Correct.
What was the big trigger to step away from full-time Air Force service and move into policing?
My dad was a part-time police officer in our hometown, and that was my goal, was to be a city police officer. So even though the Air Force was the closest branch to a civilian police agency, it still wasn't as good as a regular police agency. Of course, I
Yeah.
went in having been in Civil Air Patrol for at least 4 years and was used to using broken down Air Force equipment. But I assumed when I got in that we would have all brand new equipment and be bright and shiny and everything modern, but it wasn't. I went in, got to my base in 1980 in Ellsworth Air Force Base, South Dakota. So it was very cold. It was middle of winter. And my first police vehicle was a 1973 Dodge four-door pickup truck. So you can see that it's already 7 years old, and the heater had broken in it. And so they'd taken out the heater core and left a big gaping hole in the floor of the truck, and they would put a piece of cardboard over it and duct tape it down. And once you got over about 30 miles an hour, it would blow off, and all the road grime would come into the vehicle. And it was too cold. You had to let the dog ride inside the truck, even though there's no heater, but it was too cold to leave him in the bed. So the
Yeah.
dog is sitting in the seat right next to you, panting and fogging up the windows. So you have to roll the windows down to keep the air flowing so you can see. And the walkie-talkies were ancient, and the battery would die within an hour or two of coming on shift. And eventually you get stopped by somebody who's, hey, we've been calling you for hours. Oh, battery's dead, and go back in and get a new battery. So anyway, the reason I wanted to do my 4 years of experience was, again, to get that experience. And a lot of places in the United States have what they call civil service testing, and it
Mhm.
consists of a written examination, then a physical fitness examination, then a polygraph, psychological, medical, drug screen. And once you've done all those things, then they rank order you based on your score, and they create a list, and then they hire off that list. But when I was home in 1982, the economy was so bad that there weren't any police officer positions open, but the law required the agencies to have a list. So I was traveling all over in hopes of getting a job, taking these tests, but there were no openings. So I would score very high on the list, but there was nowhere to go. So was fortunate and was hired as a firefighter. I'd taken the fire department test. It was the very first test I'd taken because I didn't know what to expect. And I came in number one on the fire department test and number three on the police department test. And the fire department had 8 openings, and the police department had zero. So eventually I was hired as a full-time fireman. And while I was doing that, I found three part-time police positions. So I was working at three different cities as a part-time officer on my days off.
A life of service is fully entrenched at this point, whether it be whatever stream that is. And one of the things I feel in the military is, particularly in Australia, we are very lucky to have a Department of Veteran Affairs. There's a lot of focus on military support after transition. I'd have to say within Australia, certainly, I don't think police, firemen, and ambulance who quite often see far more trauma than many military people just don't have that structural support on transition. So, but again, it's the essence of the person that seems to find their way into these service careers. Tell us about your transition to becoming a chief of police force, and which city did you do that in?
As a police officer, I was critical of how our agencies were being run and, had this, vision that, we should be training all the time and firearms qualification all the time and
Mm-hmm.
better equipment. So, I was working on my education, my formal education, and started applying to be a chief of police. I thought, well, let me be an agent of change and make things better. And so I finally was hired by a small town called Bladenboro, and it was the eastern part of North Carolina. And I went in and I found out real quick why you don't get to do training or all these other things is because there's no money. And
Yeah.
when I took over that position, I found out that they were broke every year within about 6 months. And one of the reasons they were buying used highway patrol cars and they were having major mechanical repairs like engines and transmissions and rear differentials because these cars were already worn out when the city bought them for us. So that was eating up a lot of the budget. And I suggested, look, we can lease brand new police cars for the same amount of money you're purchasing these old ones for. And then at the end of the 3 years, we turn them in and get new cars under a lease. And I was finally able to, get them talked into that. But I found out though that the financing was the biggest drawback, that the
Mm.
departments barely had enough money to make salaries. And in order to do all the training, you would have to pay overtime, and they just simply didn't have that money budgeted for.
A little bit different the way that we do policing in Australia. We have state police and federal police. So state police is a predominant police force within our towns, cities, and communities. And the federal police is, I guess, the equivalent to your FBI. But you
Mhm.
have city police, is that right? So you're down at the mayoral city level. Do you have that three levels of progression? Oh, so are they separate agencies, or is there any progression between the three?
It's not really necessary progression, it's just the jurisdiction. So the lowest or smallest entity would be the city police. And then you have the county sheriff. 'Cause in North Carolina, we have 100 counties, and each county has a sheriff, and they have a patrol division, a civil division. They work bailiffs in the courtroom. They serve civil papers. They run the jail. So that's primarily their mission. So they have the
Mhm.
county, which is in my county. There's 13 police departments in the county, and then you have the sheriff's department. Then you'll have state agencies. So we have the state highway patrol that function primarily as traffic enforcement on the highways. And then you'd have like the State Bureau of Investigation that helps agencies with criminal investigations. And we would also have um, drug investigations, alcohol
Yep.
agents. So there's several different agencies at the state level. And then, of course, you go to federal, and I can't tell you how
Oh,
many
and
different federal agencies there are. There's a ton. Of course, you'd be familiar with the FBI, Federal Bureau of
of course, ATF.
Investigation, and ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and
Yep.
firearms. You hear a lot in the news today about CBP, the Border
Yep.
Patrol. So there's a lot of different federal agencies. And one of my jobs when I returned from Iraq was I was hired to be the police chief for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency in Washington, D.C. So, I got to that level as well. So I've served as a police chief in federal, state, local, and now private police department.
Look, Roy, there's so much to unpack here. And I'm not meaning to gloss over significant portions of your life with significant contribution, but there's still so much more to go. What was the trigger here to join the National Guard, which I believe is the National Guard always army, or can you have different National Guards for the different services?
Well, for National Guard, we have the Army National Guard and the Air National Guard. So you can do
Yes.
Air Force or Army. Then we also have reserves. So we have the Army
Mm.
Reserve, Navy Reserve, Marine Reserve, and that's separate. Those are military organizations, but they never really get deployed as a whole unit. They
Mm.
typically get picked apart
Reinforcements.
by full-time people needing them, whereas the National Guard would stay as a unit when it would be activated to deploy on a federal mission. So
What
it's kind of confusing. You got Army Reserve and Army National Guard, and I've been in both, but the National Guard is focused more on the state level activities
got it?
of disaster response and that type of thing.
What year are we here as a 40-year-old that you joined the National Guard? Give us a what's happening in the world at this time?
It was 2000, and why did I join was what we were getting on. I realized I live in the Research Triangle Park area, so there's a lot of very um, well-educated people that work here. You know, of course, we have some of the greatest hospitals in America here. We have three, the major colleges in the United States here. We have all kinds of high-tech industry in the area. So I'm as a police chief and I'm making an okay salary, but I'm seeing all these people that are making two or three times more money than I am. And I said, I'm in the wrong line of business. I mean, I need to figure out a way to make more money as I, grow older and have better opportunities. And so I found a job it was a blind PO box that it said emergency response professionals needed. And that was it. It didn't say any more about it. It just said it was a global organization that needed emergency response professionals. So I said, well, I'm a fireman, a policeman. I've got
This is down
hazardous
my alley.
material. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I got explosive detection dog training. So I'll apply. And I was called in for an interview, and it turned out it was Nortel Networks.
Mm.
It's a global telecommunication company that was based out of Canada. And so I was hired to be their emergency manager. So I left being a full-time police chief to go into the private sector and run, fire evacuation programs, hazardous materials, in charge of the contract security. So basically, overall safety of these different
Yep.
um, business complexes across the eastern United States, from New York to Florida, all the way to the Mississippi River. So I would travel and inspect their programs and do some training and that type of thing, do some drills every now and then. And I said, I miss doing something for the community. I really want
Yeah.
to do something. What can I do? And I thought, hey, National Guard, they come out and they assist after hurricanes and tornadoes and major snowstorms. And I would like to do that. And I knew they had a physical fitness requirement. And I said, well, that'll be good because that'll keep me into shape. I'll have
Yep.
something to shoot for. So I went down and talked to the recruiter, and I walked in and I said, I've got a master's degree. I've got all this police experience. I really don't want to be in law enforcement. I know what military police do, and I really don't want to do that. What else is there? And they said, well, what would you like to do? I said, well, I'd like to fly. I know I can't be a pilot, but do they have like crew chief or some other position that, I could fly? And they said, not really. And they said, well, we have ordnance, which is like what you did, that
Yep.
repairing vehicles and that type of thing, and then quartermaster, the supplies, and then transportation, the trucks to get stuff back and forth. And I said, well, I'm not really interested in any of that. And I'd already gone through, they made me take the ASVAB test again, our aptitude battery test, and then they had me do a physical. And then after all that, I sat down and find out there's nothing that I want to do. So I said,
Mm.
you wasted a lot of my time. If you would have answered my questions when I came in here, we would have been done in a half an hour, but you've wasted a lot of my time. So I left, and the next day I got a call from the NCOIC, non-commissioned officer in charge of the recruiting. And he said, I looked at your background. He said, you would be excellent at being a counterintelligence agent. And he
Mm.
goes, let me fax over the job description for you. And his intelligence agent does espionage, treason, and sedition investigations, plain clothes, badge and gun, doing these type of investigations. I said, "You're right. I would like to
Sounds
do
pretty good.
that." Yeah.
Yeah.
So I went through the process and, I had to enlist. And then they talked me into going to be a warrant officer instead of a full-fledged commissioned officer because they said, well, the warrant officers really do more of the technical work and they
Hands-on.
really, yeah, they're more of the real agent where the officers are more managing everything. And I said, okay, I can go along with that. And so I've only been in the Guard for about 2 months now, and I'm going on my second drill, which is going to be our 2 week annual training at Fort Bragg at the Kennedy Warfighting Center. And we're going to be, orchestrating a battle. It's a command post
Yep.
exercise. And so I'm in the intelligence section working with the other guys, and they've got the big map and all the overlays set up. And I'm saying,
Hmm.
well, the enemy's going to be over here in the western part of the country. They're going to have to come this way in order to attack us. They're going to have resupply points here and here and here. This is the type of weapon systems they have. And, I didn't realize that the colonel, the head of the whole organization, was listening to what I was saying as I'm doing this briefing for my colleagues. And over the 2 weeks, the battle unfolded exactly like I said it was
Mm.
going to. So he calls me into his office at the end of this exercise and he said, how did you know what was going to happen? He goes, you know somebody in the white cell, don't you? And I said, I'm new. I don't know what a white cell is. What is a white cell? He goes, how did you know what was going to happen? I said, well, the enemy is just like a criminal. They're always going to take the avenue of least resistance. And I was
Mhm.
looking at the terrain and distances and that type of thing in order to make that assessment. He goes, you're not going to be a warrant officer. You're going to be an officer. We're, giving you a waiver. And so I, continued on as an enlisted soldier for a few months, got a acceptance letter to officer candidate school, and off I went to, get my commission.
I got to admit, having been through our version of West Point and doing the various career courses, that is exactly what they teach you, but over several years to get to that point, to be honest. Once you get through your basic platoon commander level, which is straight up command and field craft and, learning to march around, it's not until you actually get to, senior lieutenant, captain uh, ranks that you're actually doing a lot more of that, terrain and mapping analysis and being able to brief the op cell. But this was just all somewhat nuanced through your experience of just life in the service.
Right. It was, you know, based on my experience with Civil Air Patrol and based on
Mm-hmm.
my police experience. And so the last week down at Fort Benning, we're finishing up our infantry lanes and getting ready to graduate. And three full bird colonels come down from North Carolina and they pull me out
Mm-hmm.
of class and they said, we're going to not allow you to branch counterintelligence. We need officers in ordnance, quartermaster, and transportation. So you
Yep.
have to pick one of those. I said,
This
well,
you're like, hang on a second. This is the second time you've done this to me now.
right. And I mean, now I've gone over a year of training and they're taking away the job that I wanted. And I said, and I'm as old as they are. I mean, they're 40
Yeah.
years old. I'm 40 years old. I'm not a scared second lieutenant. I said,
Yeah.
listen, gentlemen, I joined to do intelligent things with intelligent people, not people that can barely pass the ASVAB. So I said, I'm not even sure I'll stay in now because they're taking away what I want. And they said, well, we need you in one of these three roles. So I really took a lot of consideration, and I said, I've worked hard to do this. The people in the National Guard usually never do what their job is anyway,
Mm-hmm.
because that's a federal job and we're doing missions in the state. So I said, well, I'll do transportation. I can deal with that. I don't want to count body bags and beef and
Yep.
bullets all day long. And I don't want to work on trucks and turn wrenches. So I said, I don't mind. I'll be a transportation officer. So I branched transportation, went to my officer basic course. And of course, now 9/11 happened during my time at OCS. And so when I got out of officer candidate school and went to my officer basic course, which is a 4 month long full time course, our instructor said, my prediction is half of the class is going to leave immediately for Iraq. The other half will be your relief in a year. And
Yep.
it was exactly what happened. I got home and within 2 weeks of getting back, I get a call from one of my classmates, and he said, "Have you heard anything?" I said, "What do you mean heard anything?" Is are you trying to be OPSEC,
Yep.
cagey talking on the phone? I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, deploying. And I go, "Man, my unit just got back. They're not going back." He goes, "No, I've heard that you were going to be involuntarily transferred to another unit, and you were deploying." I said, "No, nobody's told me that." So I went down to the unit and talked to the full timer. He goes, "Yeah, there's some drug deal going on with you. I'm not sure, but yeah, it sounds like they'll be taking you." And another 2 weeks later, I got my orders. I was transferring to the other end of the state and would be deploying to Iraq in a few months. So I essentially, I was gone from home for over 2 years, but because I'd done the 4 years or 4 months at the officer basic course full time, and then within a month of getting back, I was reassigned to another unit that was going down to mobilization station, and we were there for 3 months doing a train up, and then we deployed to Iraq for our mission.
Uh, America's mindset at this time, you've had Gulf War One, and again, excuse my ignorance. I'm thinking back here. We're looking probably 91 to 94. Then
Mhm.
there's this sort of transition period before we go back again. What was 9/11 like at OCS?
Well, like everybody in the United States, really, I remember exactly where I was, and I was out
Yeah.
in the parking lot at Nortel Networks counting handicap parking spaces because somebody had filed a complaint that there weren't enough handicap parking spaces. And I heard the first plane. Well, we heard that there had been a plane that had struck the tower, and it looked like a small plane. And then the second plane hit, and I said, "This is a terrorist attack." And I said, "I'll guarantee those planes were both on transatlantic or cross-country flights, and they're loaded with fuel, and this is an intentional act." And that's exactly what it turned out to be. So, I mean, my phone's ringing all day long. All the candidates are calling me saying, "Sir, are we going to get mobilized and go full time? And are we going to be going to war?" I said, "Just calm down." I said, "If
Yeah.
anything happens, they'll call you, but I don't know anything. So just prepare." And that next weekend was our week drill weekend. And so our instructors told us at first formation, no one had contacted them, but our plan was to stay on track just like we were doing. And then if anybody interceded, if and we were federalized, we would get through OCS quicker. But we still have to. You can't deploy if you've not gone through your officer basic
Yeah.
course, and that's 4 months. So I said, we are not going anywhere for at least 6 months. And but everybody was scared, and I think it really put a reality check on them that, oh, I will go to war. And
Yeah.
I didn't, my ignorance when I joined the Guard, I didn't know anything about their lineage and how often they go to war. But you look at history, and Guard is in the war about every 10 years.
Yeah.
You think back World War I, less than 10 years later is World War II, less than 10 years later is Korea, less than 10 years later is Vietnam. Then you have all the stuff going on in the Gulf. I mean, so
Yep.
about every 10 years, National Guard troops are mobilized and are fulfilling the nation's needs.
It's funny how we sometimes, or for me, the silly naivety of the reality of warfare. So look, I always wanted to join the military, always wanted to do it, but I just, for whatever reason, didn't get to it until I was a little bit later. But then I remember being, at our military college, and it was quite. Someone stood up and they're like, "You will be deploying within 6 or 12 months of leaving this college," because at that time we were in Iraq, Afghanistan, East Timor, Solomon Islands, as well as all the other United Nations gigs that were going around. And I'm sitting there in the theater. I was like, and it was almost like, I'll use the word dumb. I was like, really? Am I about to go to war? And I was a little bit stunned. But there I am sitting in uniform. It's the whole point. Okay, where Iraq? What year did you land with your feet on the ground there?
March of 2004, and we stayed on the ground till April 2005. So we were there for 13 months on the ground because of the surge right at the end of our deployment.
Yeah. Whereabouts in Iraq were you?
I was a line haul transportation unit, so we sat right on the Kuwaiti-Iraqi border on the main supply route, but we always had to go back into Kuwait to the port to load up with the supplies. So we were moving equipment and supplies and repair parts on the 40-foot trailers. They were
Yep.
flatbed trailers. Most of the time we were using, Connex boxes
Yep.
attached to the trailers to call whatever was in them. Most of the time you never knew what you were hauling. But my platoon alone, we had 4 platoons. My platoon alone did 1.3 million miles,
Jeez.
and I did half of them because I took half the missions and I gave my platoon sergeant the other half of the missions, and we were out on the road almost every week for about a week, and we'd have a couple days to reset and do our laundry, and then we were given another mission and hauling stuff up. And then we also did a lot of retrograde where, when units are deploying back home, we'll take their stuff and take it back to the port and offload it. So usually had a load of equipment going up and a load of equipment coming back on each mission.
The first thing that I can think of is the vulnerability of those convoys when you've got so much of your fighting force actually up the front fighting. Was it a kinetic deployment?
Well, it was, and when I went over there, we had Operation Iraqi Freedom 1, which was the war, and I thought, well, now we're in Operation Iraqi Freedom 2. This is just going to be mop up. There's not much to it, but April of 2004 was the bloodiest month of the war and stayed that way for a number of years because that was when Fallujah happened and the Marines went in and killed a lot of people, and we got attacked every single mission once we were out the gate. And the sad thing is, and I don't mind sharing it, and it was very disappointing to me, was we were so ill prepared equipment wise. My Humvee, the command and control vehicle, soft sided. There were no armor on it at all, and no air conditioning, obviously. So it's just a military Humvee that I'm riding in. Communications, you didn't have radio communications once you left the compound. Didn't have any interpreters, didn't have any first aid equipment. I mean, nothing. And we didn't have any maps. And I thought, how can you be in the military and be in the Army and have 200 years of service behind you and not have maps of the territory you're going to? We had just PowerPoint hand-drawn maps, say go out 130 miles, turn left here, you'll see two big TV antennas, and make it the third right. And I said, remember Jessica Lynch was a female that got kidnapped during the original Iraq War in the 90s. And I always wondered, how would that have happened? Well, when I got over there and found out there weren't any maps, I thought,
how can this not happen?
It would be very easy for something like that to happen. And I had a little Garmin Rhino that I was tracking, making my own maps on, and trying to, so I wouldn't ever get lost. And we were always going to different locations as well. So it wasn't like you could have a set route all the time. And of course, depending on enemy activity, you may have to take a different way as well.
Roy, the Bronze Star with Valor, a significant achievement, acknowledgement. I believe it's the fourth highest award for bravery in the United States military. Can you share the circumstances about you being awarded this medal?
Absolutely. And it's something I'm proud of.
Should be.
I got it for saving lives instead of taking them, which is kind of unusual for a military award, but it was an attack. But it was a mission. We were going out to Forward Operating Base Duke with 84 brand new air-conditioned, up-armored Humvees for these infantry soldiers to use. The FOB isn't even on a map. And so it takes a while. We finally get up there. This is an outpost where, it's real Army life. There's no hard buildings except one that was a captured building from Iraqis, and that's what they made the headquarters in. Everybody else lived in tents. You had showers that were tents. Even the post exchange had a tent. There wasn't any frivolous stuff there at all. It was real Army life. And so I get there and I report to the commander, and it was a full bird colonel, and I was still a second lieutenant at the time. And I said, "Sir, we are delivering 84 up-armored Humvees, and we have flatbed trucks. We don't have ramps. You don't have any offloading equipment. We're in the process of trying to build a ramp with sand using some of your earth moving equipment, but we'll get them offloaded and get them to you before we quit for the day.
We'll adapt and overcome somehow."
Exactly. And he said, "Well, great, Lieutenant." He said, "We've got a couple weapons caches that we're going to go out and take tonight, so we could use some extra soldiers. So I need you and your men to, report to the TOC for a briefing." And I said, "Oh, all the way, sir. I'll be glad to." I said, "It's me and my driver and my gunner." And I got 53 Hajis. He goes, "What?" I said, "It's me, my driver, and my gunner, and 53 Hajis." And that's what, not the politically correct name, but, foreign civilian drivers, right?
Yeah.
And contracted drivers. And he goes, "You keep your Hajis outside the wire, and, we'll get you out of here in a few days when we have time." For 40 days, 40 days I lived outside the wire in a Connex box, and there was a pile of old MREs, meals ready to eat, that they had pushed out there for some reason. I don't know if it was for the civilians or what. And there was big piles of old water bottles that, were still full of clean water. But that's what we lived on. Every morning I would go in for the commander's update briefing, and I would stay, sir, can you get somebody to escort us back to the main supply route? And nope, can't do it today. But on the 40th day, he said, Lieutenant Taylor, we think we can get you out of here today. I'm going to let Sergeant Smith and Jones here take you back to the main supply route. We'll get you there. He said, so work out what you need with them. And I said, Roger, sir. So I went over and I said, okay. I said, what route are we going? Show me on the map. And I could see we had to cross the Tigris River in a couple of places. And I said, now have you gone out and done a recon on these bridges to make sure they're going to support a 40-foot Freightliner semi? Oh yeah, yes, sir. They'll do it. They'll do it. So we take off in the next morning, and as soon as we get to the first bridge, it's a crudely made bridge out of not even utility poles. They were telephone poles. They were smaller. And there's no way the bridge would have been able to take the weight. And then the way it was constructed, the trucks wouldn't fit on it anyway because the cross members on the top were too low. And I said, you're relieved. Go back to your commander and tell him you failed because you told me you did a route recon and that my vehicles would fit. So I had to figure out on my own how to go, and it took us right into the Sadar city. Well, Sadar
Hang on a
was
sec.
wanted.
Can I just grab that moment there?
Yeah.
Is it still the three of you with your drivers in these semi trailers out in the middle of somewhere,
Nowhere.
and now you're by yourself?
Correct. And I was by myself getting out of there. Now I'm by myself getting home.
Yeah. Just okay. Keep telling the story.
So
Sadar City.
as we get into Sadar City, well, we had C-Flicked. I don't remember what it is. It's an acronym is all for, but it's the highest headquarters in the battle space. And C-Flick had entered a war order that said, if you see anybody wearing a black outfit with a green sash, shoot and kill on sight, whether they have weapons or not. And I thought, that sounds like a war crime to me. And I'm going to grab that poster and keep it. And I've still got it somewhere in case I have to shoot somebody that's wearing a black gown and a green sash, because whether they're a threat or not, the order says shoot to kill. So and that was Sadar's army, and we're going right through his hometown, and we're tearing down power lines and telephone lines, and we're scraping cars because the city's not designed for these big trucks to come through there, not height wise or width wise. And I just said, we're going to get our asses tore up here with their machine gun fire coming down from buildings, and we're going to get it ambushed. But luckily we made it through, and we get through the city and back to the main supply route. Well, everything, obviously is built on sand over there. So I'm watching these trucks get on the highway, and I'm watching the earth underneath the pavement give way because of the weight. And I said, I don't know that I'm going to get all 53 of these semis up on the highway without one of them crushing through that pavement and rolling over. But we got up on the main supply route. We made it all the way back to about 100 miles just north of the Kuwaiti border. So we're traveling south. And a group of semi trucks without trailers, a band of them pulls up, and they start firing into my convoy's vehicles and pushing them off the road. And so they saw us coming, and then they all took off. But I'm trying to see what damages my drivers had incurred. And again, we don't have interpreters, and these guys are all from Pakistan, and they can't speak English really. And so I'm checking on them, and one of them says, shot, shot, shot. And they go, what? Show me, what are you talking about? Shot. And they take me, one of the drivers that got hit twice in the chest. Yeah. And so I pulled him out of the cab and put him on the ground, and I turn around, and I don't know where my gunner is. He's gone. And my driver was standing over me, and I said, give me your combat dressing. And I go, what do you mean? I lost it. Mm. Well, so I'd already plugged two of his holes with my combat dressing because they were close enough. So I had to unplug the hole, cut it in half with my K-bar, and plug his other holes with it. And of course, he's scared. And I had my driver, I said, help me get him into the back of the Humvee. So we got him loaded up. And I said, look, I was a medic. I can take care of you. So you're in really good hands. Just be calm, and I'm going to get help for you, but you're going to make it. And The only communication we had was our, we called MTS system, mobile tracking system, and you could send like a text message with it, and you could tell where you were at on a map, and it would give you a 10-digit grid. So I sent a message to my headquarters and said, I've got a civilian casualty, multiple gunshot wounds to the chest, need immediate dust off, which was the code word for
Helicopter, yeah.
helicopter. And they said, negative, area 2, hot
Hostile.
with enemy activity, continue the mission. I said, negative, patient critical, can't move. Negative, move and destroy
Okay.
his vehicle and continue the mission. I
Right. Can
said,
I
man,
just stop? Can I just stop you there for a second? I'm just
sure.
getting my head around this. Correct my geography if I'm wrong, but Sadar City is used to be called Saddam City, and it's part of Greater Baghdad.
No, it was almost to Syria where we were at.
Hang on. Okay. Okay. Right. Right. So you're over that side of the country.
Hmm.
That's several hundred kilometers from the Kuwaiti border. Is that correct?
It was a long way. It was about a
Uh,
3-day trip out there.
the other thing that I'm thinking here is just when I put my logistics officer hat on, a convoy of 53 semi trailers is distinctly long. You know,
Very long, several miles long.
you can't see the front from the back. Where are you in this convoy? At the front, the middle, the back?
Driving alongside of it from front to back to middle. I was constantly moving back and forth. And if there was a turn coming up, I would lead them to get them onto the right road. And then I would pull over and stop and wait for the last vehicle to go by. And then I would speed ahead of them and take over the lead again. So I was leapfrogging the whole time, but I'm the only military vehicle. Everybody else is in a
Just in trucks.
civilian Mercedes. Yeah, they were in a
Mm.
Mercedes semi.
I
So
just want to acknowledge for me, the first thing that I think of there is the pressure or the complexity or just the absolute chaos and lack of command and control if and when things do go wrong.
yeah,
Just
there is
it's
none.
a bit boggling to my even to my loggy head. If something goes wrong anywhere along that line in the convoy, just without comms, how do you even pull the convoy up? Or there's no ability to, they're not even military, so there's no counter ambush or anything like that.
Nope.
Um,
That's the
so
sad part about it. That's how unprepared we were. And if things were to standard, we would have had one green truck for every 6 civilian
yeah,
trucks was the
at least with
formula.
some light machine guns or something to
And that's all we had was, the M249s.
yeah
We had several Ma Deuces, the M2, M50 caliber, but we could never
yeah.
get them to run. And so we would just use the M249, the saw. And so it was only a 5.56 round.
Mm.
But yeah, it was like I said, it was very disappointing equipment wise, and no communication. Once you rolled out, you were just by yourself, and no maps to really help plan your route or know where you're going. So anyway, I'm treating this guy the best I can, treating him for shock. I'm arguing with my headquarters, and luckily, a Iraqi police truck came by, and one of
Mm.
the 2 police officers that was in it could speak a little English. And I said, I have a gunshot wound victim. How far away is the nearest hospital? And he said, about 25 miles. And I said, can you take this man to the hospital for me? And they said, yeah, we'll take him. And I was surprised, but they loaded him in their pickup truck, and I wrote down as many English numbers and things that I could recognize to try to identify him, so I could tell the headquarters where this guy went on my
Yeah.
serious incident report. And they took him, and I managed to take one of my well found another driver and took this guy's truck. So we were able to get all the equipment back and get back on the road to the southern part of Iraq. But the sad part about it was my gunner, like I said, he disappeared on me. I don't know where he went. And after my driver helped me load the patient into the back of the Humvee, he disappeared. They both left me by myself with no cover, while they know I'm engaged in communicating with our command center and trying to treat a patient. And so anyway, after I got him evac out of there. I said, "Where the hell were you?" "Well, we were pulling security." I said, "Well, you were doing a damn good job because I couldn't find you." And the gunner was in shock. He was petrified. He wouldn't even answer a question. He was just staring off in a gaze look. Put him in the back of the Humvee. So now I don't have anybody on the gun. So I've just got my driver driving and me, in the passenger seat on the communicator and monitoring what's going on. And then we got ambushed again when we were going across the Kuwaiti border. Like I said, I pull over to the side of the road and I wait for all the trucks to go by. And I see one truck at the pretty good ways away, but it's just stopped. And I go, what is this guy doing? Why is he stopped? Why is he not moving? So I go back and I find there's a sandal laying in the street. There's an operator's manual for the vehicle laying there, but there's nobody around it. And so I told my driver, I said, well, I'll drive the Humvee across the border. You drive this truck across. And we found that they had disconnected the brake line. So we figured out had happened when we found the driver finally, that two guys jumped out in front of him. He was the last vehicle in the convoy, pointed AK-47s at him, got him out of the truck, took his passport, and he took off running, and he caught up to the truck ahead of him and got in the crew cab with him and got out of there. But he left his truck there. So he lost his sandal and has lost his passport. But we were able to recover the truck and get it across the border and figure out what was going on. But anyway, the Bronze Star was for, gallantry and valor while under a deliberate enemy attack and saving one of the contract drivers' lives and getting him medevaced out, with no support. So that was what the Bronze Star with Valor was. And so, a little bit of enemy action, but mostly it was for, saving a life. And several months later, the Al Hamadi trucking company that had the contract, it was renewed, and the owners threw a big lavish party for all the officers. We just weren't allowed to go in uniform. So we have this great tent feast, and the Transformation Command General was there to give awards to civilian drivers who were injured in the line of duty. And one of them was my guy, that he had actually been treated and recovered, and he was there. And out of all the bald-headed white guys in civilian clothes there, he recognized me and came up and hugged me and thanked me for saving his life and gave me his information to contact him, when he got home to Pakistan. So it was a good story. The gunner never went out on another mission ever again. They made him permanent nighttime security. And I had a pretty harsh conversation with my driver. If he ever left me alone and uncovered, we'd have a problem. So
I just want to recognize the complexity of that moment. Again, I have not experienced that within my military career. It just boggles my head. Again, the thing that I keep coming back to is trying to have some kind of command and control over the length of that convoy. And as you said, the convoy is a couple of miles long. Yet there is enemy infiltrating the convoy at any particular time. Even that last episode where the two lads, with AKs came out, and like, it's just boggling to me how, well, is it, as you look back in perspective, and obviously hindsight, is 2020 vision, was it appropriate due to the pace of the war and risk managed enough? Noting that in the military, we take risk. Was it appropriate, or do you think it was, I don't want to say incompetent or negligent, or was it inappropriate? I'll just keep it that simple.
Well, we have to do risk assessments on every mission. And if it's a high risk assessment, it has to be signed off by a battalion commander. So here I am, this old second lieutenant, and I was going to the commander, and it was 101st Airborne Division commander. And I said, sir, I've got my risk assessment. It's high. I need your signature. Lieutenant, there's a war going on. Of course it's going to be high. And I said, well, I'm not saying I'm not going. I'm just following regulation. It says if it's high, I said, sir, I have no radio communications. I have no translator. I have no first aid equipment. I don't have any maps. I said, I don't have any way to overcome these issues. And therefore, my risk assessment is very high. And I need your signature. I'm not saying I'm not going. I'm going to do my job, but I'm not going to get left hanging out to dry when somebody, if we get wiped out, says, why were you doing this? And you didn't even have risk assessment approval. So he goes, well, don't you bring me another one of these? And he would sign it. And then the next week I'd be back and it'd be the same situation. And he was mad, but
go away. Just sign it, go away.
Right. He finally signed. I wasn't going to take the chance. And so to answer the question is, it was inappropriate, and it just showed me that how badly the U.S. Army was at being prepared. Why would you send
Yeah.
troops to a hostile environment like that without armored vehicles?
Mm.
You know, I
Well,
mean,
did you have them? Did the military have them and they were just
well,
wrong allocation, or was
they,
it just we're just cuffing this and we're just going to get it done?
the loggies are going to be the last to get anything high tech. So I mean, in the infantry soldiers, like we had delivered 84 brand new up armored Humvees with air conditioner to this infantry unit.
Yeah,
But
yeah, exactly.
I didn't have that. Mine was a 1986 Humvee that had gone to the first war there and come back. All of our units equipment had gone to Gulf War. Every truck or pre-1990 model had already served time in the Iraq theater, and now they were back a second time. And we loaded them up and took them back home, and they would probably go back again. And they were 1980 modeled Freightliner trucks, and just like my 1986 Humvee. So the reserve, is going to be on the tail end of receiving equipment, the reserve, the guard. So it's disappointing. But what really surprised me over all of it was the lack of maps. That you wouldn't have the ability to produce military maps so you could figure everything out in the grid and do all your planning like you're taught. But instead, you're given a hand-drawn map with rudimentary mile markers. And again, the trucks are worn out already, and there's no guarantee that you can
Yeah.
say, okay, I'm looking at the odometer. Okay, let's go 10 miles. It's going to be close, but when you get to that 10-mile mark and there's 3 exits that all look the same, which one do you pick?
It does give me a somewhat, I say this facetiously, sense of anxiety putting myself into your shoes and having to do that. So I just want to, hats off to you for that moment. On reflection, how do these moments sit with you when you look
Uh,
back now as, 20 years later?
I'm proud I got to serve and do what I did. Somebody's walking around on this earth today because I was able to, provide basic first aid and get them evac out of there. I didn't just cave into the first command to
Yeah.
pack up, blow his truck up, and move on and allow him to bleed out. So, my tenaciousness, to find another way to make it happen worked out. And so he's hopefully happy and healthy and enjoying the rest of his life. And um, my soldiers were always willing to follow me into battle, if you will, and we never had any issues with not having the proper planning. We did everything that we could to mitigate the dangers. We, practiced the herringbone and other techniques we
Yep.
used to, set up the vehicles if we came under fire. And most of the time we were, just pushing on the accelerator and getting through the
Punch on
fight,
through.
because typically it was a IED that was blown, and then as soon as the IED blows up, then you start getting some sniper fire because they figure you're going to slow down and stop, and we just would roll on through. So we never really had to stop and take a defensive position. We just were able to keep moving, thankfully.
Roy, this is a business podcast. And what I'm going to do is, if you've got a little bit more time, I'd love to transition to the next part of the story. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap episode 1 just there. So if you're listening to this right now, stick around another couple of days, because we're going to go into part 2 with Roy, where we talk about the transition out of the military and into his business career. You happy with that, Roy?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So let's wrap there on part 1 of the Veteran Business Community podcast with Dr. Colonel Chief Taylor, and we'll be right back in a couple of days' time.